Hello and welcome to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk. I'm Keith Menconi. This week we're going to be listening to a conversation with Dr. Sha Liu with the Research Center for Environmental Changes at Academia Sinica. Construction of the controversial fourth nuclear plant was halted in April, and the Ma administration has said its fate is to be determined by a public referendum. With Taiwan's other three nuclear plants likely to be decommissioned over the next decade or so, Taiwan is now facing the question of how it will secure its energy supply in the coming years. Recently, about 50 Academia Sinica academicians in Taiwan pushed the government to start the hard work of answering that question. They signed a joint statement calling for political parties to work together to open up the decision about the fourth nuclear plant to a public referendum. We're joined now by one of the document's signers, Dr. Sha Liu. He's an academician and distinguished visiting fellow at the Research Center for Environmental Changes at Academia Sinica. Dr. Liu, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Keith.
So outside of calling for a more concerted effort to grapple with the energy problem, the statement also pointed out the inherent dangers of running nuclear facilities, and on the flip side of that, it also highlighted the potential of renewables as a source of safe, clean energy. But of course, all energy sources carry with them costs and limitations. So can you help give us an understanding of the choices that Taiwan has at this point?
Currently, the biggest one and also the cheapest one is the coal-fired electricity. That production, I guess, is around 1 NTD per du. Mm-hmm. That's the Taiwan unit of electricity. Okay, and comparing to that, nuclear energy actually is very competitive. Depending how you count, it's around the same order as coal-fired. That's why nuclear energy is very attractive in terms of cost. But of course, nuclear energy has this big risk of nuclear accident, and of course, storage of the nuclear waste is another big problem. But these fossil fuel energies, coal, oil, and gas, they produce CO2 that warms the atmosphere. Okay, greenhouse gas. That's very, I would say, one of the worst environmental problem now facing the world.
And Taiwan is per capita one of the biggest producers of greenhouse gas in the world as well.
Correct. In fact, if we count only those countries with a population 10 million or more, the per capita emission of CO2, Taiwan actually ranks fourth in the entire world.
So the reason I raise these questions is just to illustrate that there really are some difficult decisions that need to be made. And so I think that one of the things that your document was looking to do is raise the profile of this issue as something that people should be thinking about, people should be talking about. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of dialogue you're hoping to start and what kind of moves you would like to see the different parts of societies, whether it be government or academic or some other part, what actions you'd like to see them take to progress this issue and move towards finding viable solutions?
Yeah, by this statement, I think the major objective is to point out that we really need to sit down and consider all options. One of the points I want to emphasize from the beginning is that saving energy is one very important issue that we should consider. In fact, we actually believe even we don't go to nuclear energy and we just maintain current level of electricity production and other energy use, we're pretty sure with genuine effort to save energy, we will have maybe at least 5 years of time for us to just sit down and go through each options. And with plenty of time, we rationally make what you call a balanced plan, such that we can go forward without emitting too much CO2.
So the crisis has not come yet. We still have a few more years where we really have an opportunity to look at this closely. So in those couple of years that we have remaining, what do you think people should be doing to move this conversation forward?
Yes, a very important question. The government will hold a energy conference later this year, but I think that's really just a start. I think we need not these meetings. We need various groups of experts to consider all options. We'll have both pro and con to go over the nuclear option. In our statement, we actually did not rule out nuclear.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the very fact we call for referendum.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Right.
I mean, but in addition to that, we also suggested nuclear might be a good option for other countries that's not so close to the earthquake belt of the world,
right.
Okay, like Taiwan is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what we need to do is really with people, with scientists, with government officials, sit down together and come up with a balanced energy policy.
So let's. There are a lot of options that the government and society in general has as they try to work through this problem. In the document, at least, one of the options that Academia Sinica made a point of highlighting the positive side of it was renewable energy, solar, wind, this form of energy. So I want to ask you, if Taiwan as a whole really embraced this kind of energy and made it a very high priority to develop this, how far could renewables go towards addressing Taiwan's energy problem?
I think quite far and quite effectively. Renewable energy right now, actually, in practical sense, there are only solar energy and wind energy.
Mm-hmm.
Other kind of energy, such as ocean waves, ocean current, those are not really practical or viable. And even wind energy, when you consider that in Taiwan, over the shore, there's already people protesting for the windmills, and even over the oceans, which is much more expensive. In addition to that, the most serious problem of wind energy is seasonal. I mean, it's only in the winter half of the season that we have enough energy, wind energy. And since we still have no way of storing energy long term, you have to switch to something else in the summer half of the year. Okay, so that really limited the wind energy. Solar energy, of course, has a similar problem. You only get the energy when there's sun. Okay, you don't get at night. But at least there's a very short-term storage that we can do a little bit, such as in the battery, or sometimes they pump water, okay, back to the reservoir and store that way.
So that would be, you pump it to the top, it runs back down and powers turbines as it goes back down. So it's a way of storing the energy.
That's right. Yeah. You can do it when there's no sun. Okay. And the solar energy also is much more powerful compared to wind energy. And in addition to that, the solar energy now, the cost is coming down. Okay, almost continuously. We heard now that the solar energy is already getting to about 5 Taiwan dollars. That's still about 5 times the coal-fired energy, but it's comparable to gas-fired electricity. So with a few more years, I foresee that solar energy can probably release up to, say, 50% of the electricity in the next few decades.
Oh, really? 50%?
Yeah.
And that would, just to emphasize this point, that would more than compensate for nuclear, because nuclear is currently about 20% Well, let me ask about the land issue, because you already mentioned that there has been a little bit of protests on the East Coast because of the wind turbines there. So would solar have the same issue if you were really trying to cover the island with solar panels?
I think in that regard, we actually have much more options. For example, you can put a channel for solar panels in the islands west of Taiwan Strait. There's a group of islands, and if you stretch them up over the island, I think there's a lot of space there. And I wouldn't even rule out Taiwan Strait supported over the water. Maybe we can even think of solar energy produced across the strait in China and import there. I mean, it's quite close.
Yeah. So joining the grids between Taiwan and China.
Yeah.
What is the time frame that you think that this might be possible to achieve? Because the 3 remaining nuclear plants are set to go offline in about 10 years. You're talking about completely changing the way Taiwan gets its energy sources. Do you think that there is enough time to build up this infrastructure and solve some of the technical issues that you've already mentioned? Do you think that there's enough time to get this in place before Taiwan starts experiencing shortages?
I think so. I think the solar-powered electricity is already being done. They are producing solar electricity in Europe. Okay.
So you're saying the technology is already there?
Yeah, it's already there. Right now, the only limitation to that is really the cost. And you mentioned about the space. That's much farther down the road. Okay. We can sacrifice some of the land in the first, say, 5 years, but eventually, if we wanted to really extend to like 50% of our electricity, I think we have to think creatively to find the space, the place.
What do you think is the government's role in promoting this switch to solar power? What are the policies that they should adopt and the actions that they should take to make this switch happen?
That's sounds simple question, but it actually is very complicated. The biggest hurdle is that right now electricity produced from solar energy is still too expensive. The government must find a way to pass that hurdle, and probably, subsidize the production. But eventually, I think the solar energy electricity will be cost effective. I think in 10 years, maybe no more than 15 years, they will be as cheap as, for example, oil and gas produced electricity.
On the technical end of things, what do you think would be the main challenges in making a switch to solar or other renewables?
I mentioned right now the only big hurdle is the cost, and that's not something we cannot overcome. I do think we said the government can put in some money to subsidize, and at the beginning, but after 5 to 10 years, I think they can take it away, and the industry or the solar energy industry eventually can produce power with low cost and survive their own way.
So would you say that down the road it would be possible for Taiwan to completely abandon nuclear energy?
That certainly is possible and is doable. Nevertheless, we have to work very hard toward that goal. We cannot just like business as usual, wasting a lot of energy. For example, I say, if we want to go solar energy way and get rid of all the nuclear energy, what do we need to do? First, immediately, we have to save energy in Taiwan. We cannot waste anymore. And that will buy us at least a few years. And then the government can put in money to make solar energy affordable for the people. But after a few years, the solar energy, the cost will come down, and eventually the solar energy industry can do well on their own.
And of course, some of the biggest energy wasters would be industry. Is that right? A lot of inefficient industry and inefficient use of power within industry. Is that right?
You're right, but it's just normal usage is also quite wasteful. You're quite right. In Taiwan, for a very good example is the steel producing industry. We import rather cheaply international coal from Australia and import to Taiwan, and the government does not apply any tax on the coal. And the steel industry, they just use cheap coal to produce expensive steel and export. I wouldn't blame them if they use the steel for Taiwan's own construction. But most of the steel we produce, we export to mainland China, for example. And you can see that you import a lot of energy cheaply, you burn, and you produce steel and export to somebody else. We waste a lot of energy.
So down the road, what do you think would be the ideal? Maybe this is a question that we haven't really answered yet. I'm not sure. Do you think that there is an ideal energy mix that we should be aiming for, like 50% renewables, 30% coal, 20% something else, or is that a question that's still open?
Yeah, I think that question is still open. We really don't know what we can do. I can see that if we do good research, it's quite reasonable to expect that eventually solar energy can take care of nearly all what we need. Potentially, we can do that. So the energy future is not as
dire,
gray or dark as we imagine. It's just like previously, like developing semiconductor. When they first come, they are bulky, they're expensive, But now, look at it. It's fast, much faster. Maybe not just 100 times faster, it's 1 million times faster. And probably 100 or 1,000 times cheaper. And I think solar energy will do that way too.
So going back to the process of how Taiwan is going to make this decision, probably the closest term thing that's coming up where this conversation is going to be really important is there's going to be a national energy conference coming up in either late August or early September. How optimistic are you that a positive step in some of the directions that you've been talking about is going to come out of that conference?
Well, I think I don't expect a whole lot from one single conference. I think that's a good start. But to come up with a balanced, viable energy plan is not easy. One conference maybe just do a little dent. And we need, like I mentioned earlier, that we need to sit down and consider all options carefully, and at the same time we let people know what's involved to get energy self-sufficient and yet not using high risk, high environmental impact energy sources.
We've been speaking to Dr. Sha Liu. He's an academician and distinguished visiting fellow at the Research Center for Environmental Changes at Academia Sinica. Dr. Liu, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome. I enjoy it too.
Thanks for listening to Taiwan Talk. As always, we'd love to hear what you thought of today's program. You can leave us a comment on our Facebook page or rate and review Taiwan Talk on iTunes. This helps us bring you the kind of shows you want to hear and makes it easier for other people to discover the program. For ICRT, I'm Keith Menconi.